So warm welcome to Africa 360. We're the program that goes right across the continent to bring you news and views that you won't get anywhere else. And of course, those views are with a distinctly African perspective. I'm Chris Maroleng and you're watching Africa 360. The power blaze raging in the upper echelons of Lesotho's government have pushed the Mountain Kingdom into political instability once again, serious enough to raise fears of an imminent coup.
What we are concerned about is a build-up of military presence in and around the capital, Maseru.
Well, Lesotho has a long history of fractious politics and floor crossings preceding most of the elections that they've held in that country. These contribute to what has been described as a largely politically unstable situation, what has seen the destabilization of political parties and indeed governance in general in that country. But before we go deeper into the analysis of Lesotho, here's a fact file that gives you a sense of the political situation in the Mountain Kingdom. Well, Lesotho began as a protectorate of the British. And as you can see from the map coming up there, Lesotho was formed as a British protectorate. It gained independence in 1966 and is described in terms of its governance as a constitutional monarchy, which basically means that the king himself is seen as the head of state of that country. When we move forward in terms of our fact file, the legislature of Lesotho is really governed by, previously, by what was described as the first past the post system, where the party with the most seats in parliament would effectively govern and form a government in that country. Now, an intervention by the Southern African Development Community tried to regulate this winner-take-all dynamic through the first past-the-post system by introducing an element of proportional representation which would allow the smaller parties in parliament also to find representation in their legislative house. Let's move to the next slide on our fact file, which basically talks about the current dynamic, or since 2012, when elections were held in Lesotho, which saw Prime Minister Tom Thabane taking office. It is indeed Prime Minister Tom Thabane who has prorogued or suspended Parliament, ostensibly because he was anticipating a vote of no confidence by some of his fellow opposition parties that formed this coalition in Lesotho. Now, the interesting thing about the dynamic of what faces Tom Thabane there is that it's really a microcosm of the challenges faced by most countries that have a government that is based on a coalition system. Well, with Prime Minister Tom Thabane having a suspended parliament, there are concerns about the political situation there. Take a look.
For decades, the tiny landlocked mountain kingdom of Lesotho has relied heavily on its giant neighbor, South Africa, to advance both economically and politically. The last time South Africa intervened to restore order to Lesotho was in September 1998. Then, around 600 South African soldiers entered the country in an effort to deal with what was described as a deteriorating political and security situation. The South African National Defence Force was assisted by the Botswana Defence Force under a Southern African Development Community mandate. Codenamed Operation Boleas, the operation emanated from the dissatisfaction of opposition parties, who demanded that King Letsie III use his powers to dismantle parliament, accused of having been fraudulently elected. Now, South Africa has expressed concern about a possible coup scare in neighboring Lesotho. This due to what has been described as the unusual troop movement in the capital, Maseru.
We now have information that there's been prorogation of Parliament, And in terms of their constitution, the coalition government has 9 months till they call the next elections. It has to happen within 9 months. If that is the situation, that there's been prorogation of parliament.
So, how has Lesotho landed in what is being described by some political analysts as a constitutional crisis? The answer could be that the police and the military are reportedly at loggerheads over a dispute emanating from an imminent collapse of the coalition government, formed after the 2012 elections. Early in June, some opposition parties accused Prime Minister Tom Thabane of withholding critical information from his government's coalition partners, the Lesotho Congress of Democracy and the Basotho National Party. Sources from Lesotho have told ENCA that aside from suspending parliament, Thabane is also alleged to have unilaterally sacked senior government officials in recent weeks, including the public prosecutor. As a result, a motion of no confidence on him is believed to have been on its way to remove him. But it seems he read the Riot Act and decided to prorogue parliament for 9 months. Some opposition leaders are suggesting that Thabane never liked the coalition government to begin with. But his alleged unilateral actions have led to a split along party lines between military and police chiefs within Lesotho. And these circumstances have led to concerns about the country's political and security situation. And because when South Africa sneezes, Lesotho catches a cold, perhaps South Africa's concerns about the latest political developments in that country are justified. Despite South Africa's concerns, though, it turned out to be a coup that never was.
Do join us after the break because when we come back, we will go deeper into unpacking some of the dynamics of Lesotho when we're in conversation with our panel of experts only on Africa 360.
This is not a constitutional monarchy.
Yeah.
The king has some executive power.
We're quite aware that that which we have in Lesotho under the Right Honourable Prime Minister Thabane is a coalition government. So coalition politics are never easy. We had full confidence that the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Prime Minister, would always try to do his best to put the interest of the people of Lesotho first, and we think he's really been trying his best.
Martin Rupia, some interesting statements there coming from South Africa's foreign minister regarding these apparent, alleged coup possibilities in Lesotho. I don't know how you can best describe them. Tell us, first of all, before we continue, were these apparent threats of a coup credible at all?
I think let's begin by a caveat, Chris. And that is, any coalition government is actually a very difficult process.
Yeah.
But if you take a coalition and then superimpose that on the Lesotho politics, then one really is beginning to see a very difficult dynamics that have not come together since 1998,
Yes.
etc. So there are three very key political players.
Yes.
You have, of course, the political parties,
Yeah.
and Tom Thabane, Prime Minister, now running a coalition. And you also have a king who is not exactly out of politics.
Yeah.
Tom Thabane has produced a document trying to prorogue parliament, which is submitted to the king. And he's citing section 81, subsection 1 and 4, in which he seems to allege that the king has some powers.
Yeah.
So in other words, this is not a constitutional monarchy.
Yeah.
The king has some executive powers. The third is, of course, the divisions between the police and the military, which have not come together.
Yeah.
So there are three constituencies, and it seems to me the issues have not settled, and that's why any troop movements really sounded some sort of warning, which have been referred to by the South Africans.
Let's bring in Professor Rock here. It's very interesting what Martin has been telling us about these various constituencies that we're seeing, also underpinned by fraught civil-military relations in that country. Now, one of the key factors, and I think it's indicative of the fact that South Africa's own government had to make a statement about this, is the dependence on South Africa, which totally surrounds Lesotho. Can you give us a sense about how important this dependence has been in shaping Lesotho?
In order to understand this situation in Lesotho, I think we need to take a step or two steps back to understand exactly what's gone wrong. Okay. For the first time in the last elections, Lesotho had a coalition government. They never had one before. And what had brought about the coalition government is the splintering within the Congress movement. First from LCD, you can go back a long way. When it comes to splintering, the Congress movement has actually made it an art of splintering. I think predominantly because they don't have a strong tradition, historical tradition of debate, internal debates. So when these issues come forward, normally what you see is a splinter. So when they came in '93, very soon thereafter, Sumo Hetler himself splintered from the LCD. LCD, there were a lot of smaller splinters, and then the ABC came from LCD. Then very soon as we approached the last elections, Mosisili took his faction from LCD to form DC. Okay. So at the time of the last election, three main parties went for the election: ABC, LCD, and DC.
That's it.
Okay. And of course, you had a hung parliament. The outcome was a hung parliament. So they had to settle for coalition. Now, the Lesotho parties who settled for coalition, they didn't settle for coalition because they had a fantastic program that they want to follow, nor did they have an ideological cohesion that they wanted to pursue. ABC and LCD got into government to lock out the DC.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, because the bitterness between the LCD and DC was still very, very much so the case.
And I think this is a fantastic place to bring in Dr. Rupia here, because, you know, this fantastic summary of this coalition process gives us a bit of an insight into what's been going on in Lesotho in terms of the political parties. And here I refer to the fact that after the 1998 King's coup, if you could describe it as that, what effectively emerged in Lesotho was an electoral system that tried to manage and create peace and security. Can you tell us a little bit about that initiative?
Before I refer to that, I need to acknowledge that SADC is already doing something. In the middle of May, Pohamba, president of Namibia, was actually, you know, in Lesotho. Behind the scenes trying to, you know, pull the strings together. But then let me go back to the question you asked. What that means is that it took more than 2 years.
Pull what together?
To pull the parties together to have a discussion and maybe to pull back from the brink of creating what SADC was thinking is almost a self-made crisis. But to go back to...
Okay, Martin, in that case, let me interfere with you, because let's take that step back so that you can then add to what I'm going to say.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Let me just continue from where the coalition was, the LCD-ABC coalition, locking out DC. And precisely because they didn't lock them out, because they had a clear program, tensions have existed between LCD and ABC from day one of the coalition. And over the since the beginning of this year, there have been so much tensions. There have been rumors and rumors and rumors about military, about police, and there have been frictions within the military itself. When the military actually defied the people who had been locked in, these were a reflection of the tensions which were existing within LCD, ABC, and the DC outside there as the controller of the army. Because remember, it's the DC which appointed this new army. So it was able to play around with this. So this tension has been existing. This crisis is a culmination of the tensions that have existed from day one, but have been made much more serious by what the LCD asserts is the unilateral actions of Tom Tabane himself.
So Martin, then give us a sense of that.
To reinforce what Professor Rokajuli is saying, is that although the DC appears to control certain factions of the military and the police, the king also controls certain factions, of both the police and the military. And the dynamics around which this environment is taking place, perhaps provides an opportunity for some of the key players, the king and the factional, military sector, to begin to play a role.
Yeah.
Because there's almost a power vacuum.
Yes.
That has been created.
Politics not stabilizing, an economy probably on the rise. The question that I'll be asking after the break to our distinguished panel of guests as we focus on Lesotho is whether indeed this hasn't been a case of a failed social experiment in Lesotho. Join us after the break and we'll give you the answers.
Tom Tabane was moved to provoke Parliament because he didn't know whether he was going to have his job the next day. Yes. So he had to. You see.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us today, we're discussing the political dynamics of the Kingdom of Lesotho. This after Prime Minister Tom Tabane suspended the country's parliament and the recent fears of a military coup. Now, before we went to break, I said that I would ask you a direct question, whether we could actually say that this is actually an indication that this experiment, principally by the Southern African Development Community to restore peace and security to Lesotho through military reform and by introducing this mixed member proportional representative system to parliament, has basically failed, because it seems like the coalition system which it's developed is also failing now. Prof?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's failed. I think it's quite a success. Because if you look at the first two elections from '93, nobody else was represented in parliament except the BCP in '93. Then in '98, only one other party was represented. The rest of the parties, okay. Right. It's only after the introduction of this that you began to find what you can call an inclusive parliament. And to that extent, I'll say that it has been a success.
Yes.
But what people don't understand is the gist, what I call the knockabout of Lesotho politics. That what is causing these problems are the knockabout of the Lesotho politics. What did take place in this case, as the tensions increased within the coalition, then the typical knockabout of Lesotho politics set in. So each faction saying, what do we do, where do we go? So that's when the LCD decided that they're going to go into bed with their old mates, DC. And that's a talk which didn't start yesterday. These talks have been going on between the DC and the LCD.
So then, given the fact that it's quite clear that the move was towards forging or creating better coalitions to enhance a more cooperative system of governance in Lesotho, you could say it's failed, Prof. No. Because we're seeing yet again the system not working well for this body politic.
No, Chris, listen, Lesotho is not unique in this case. Okay. What we ought to understand is that in particular in Africa, but more importantly in economies which are underpinned by primitive accumulation and rent-seeking activities, the state becomes the central player.
But we should not miss the fact that the Prime Minister himself appears to have found a role for the king in the decision that he is taking. Remember, the two parties were about to take a no-confidence vote on alleging that he is becoming unilateral instead of playing as a coalition leader. So we need to keep in mind how the executive prime minister now appears to find a role, an alliance, as it were, with the king to prorogue parliament.
Yes.
And this is a reversal, in some sense, of democracy.
But is that, Martin, I'm not quite sure that is an alliance. Because I'm told from some of my legal friends that what Tom Tabane did was constitutionally correct. You can't, proroguing parliament is constitutionally correct. You cannot fault him on that. You can fault him having been, if he remained a majority and a minority leader in government,
yes.
you can question his political legitimacy.
Yes, but I think also here's the thing. Surely there is the situation of the ethics of it, because it does appear that he faced a possible vote of no confidence in Parliament. And that really inspired his decision to prorogue.
No, we cannot.
The point I'm making is that it is supposed to be, the king is not supposed to have an executive role. And so the point I'm making is that we now begin to see an executive role of the king.
But it's the king who asks the leading party to form a government, you see.
Right.
Yes,
because the king actually appoints the prime minister.
He appoints the prime minister
from the party with the majority.
It's exactly like the British system.
Yes.
Where the queen opens the parliament,
yes.
appoints the So what I'm talking about constitutionalism or constitutionality of it, that we can debate. But what I agree with you, Tom Tabane was moved to provoke Parliament because he didn't know whether he was going to have his job the next day. Yes, exactly. So he had to, you see. And I'm saying that give any politician, no, Tom, this is not unique to Tom. Any politician would have done that. If you knew that Chris and group were coming to a vote, and the thing is that it had already been, the document was ready.
Yes.
The statement of the vote of no confidence was ready.
Yes.
They had done their numbers. Everybody was doing their numbers.
So
and the rumors, Maseru was the rumor, everybody knew who is voting which side and who is voting his side. So if you are Tom, what were you going to do?
It's interesting that we're now at this point. If you look into the future over that horizon, should we be concerned about the real prospects yet again of some kind of unconstitutional change of power occurring during what appears to be this constitutional crisis?
My sense is this. It's been very good that not only South Africa but other colleagues, and including ourselves, have picked up the signs of a potential coup.
Yes.
There must be a generation, in my view, in Lesotho, which must come up and begin to behave differently to what we have seen. Because if you look at the trajectory, the history of the political dynamics, some of the actors go back a long time.
But Martin,
and one is now hoping there is a transition in the political conduct.
Where's this generation coming from? Because even if look, I keep saying that Lesotho is not unique.
Yes.
Look at other African countries. 50 years after independence, the new generation is behaving exactly like their forefathers in terms of the conduct of politics. Yes. So let's shift from that to try to understand what is the problem with the African post-colony.
Right. Yeah.
What is the problem?
What is the problem?
And the problem simply is politics is a reflection of the economy systems that exist. And the economic system that we have, as I've said, in most of the continent, is underpinned by real, most of it is primitive accumulation, rent-seeking activities. And as a result, because those are anchored within the state, all those areas anchored within the state, you need to capture state power. Yeah. And all politics is about capturing state power. It's a zero-sum game. It's a zero-sum game towards capturing state power. So once you capture it, you are sitting safe. And that's typical of most African countries. Think of any African country. That's typical. Lesotho is just an exemplification of it because of the size. We can see it you can see it very vividly. You don't even have to try to theorize. But you can.
So Martin, it's a very bleak assessment there.
That only where the state is the only game in town. Then until we move away from that, create a private sector, a vibrancy, away from the state which is dominant in contracting, in tendering, in revenue, there's no real wealth being created. Yes. And so I think I agree with the Prof that we have to move away from there and to move perhaps to
gentlemen, unfortunately I would love to continue the debate, but we have unfortunately run out of time here on Africa 360. We really thank you for your insights and inputs on Lesotho, and certainly we look forward to having you yet again to help us understand the politics of the African continent. And do remember, if you'd like to leave a comment or join the debate on Parliament, you can certainly do so by joining us on Facebook, or you can tweet us your views on Africa360_ENCA. You can also send us an email to africa360@enca.com. So until next time, we look forward to bringing you Africa like you've never seen before. Take care.